Hello and welcome to today's lecture on Aristotle's theory of justice. The main objectives of this lecture are understanding Aristotle's concept of justice, exploring the types of justice, analyzing justice and reciprocity, interpreting political justice, and evaluating the relationship between laws and justice. Justice stands as a cornerstone among moral and political ideals, with Greek political thought at its epicenter. Western philosophers, on the whole, consider justice to be the linchpin virtue for structuring human interactions and ensuring the stability of societies. While it's somewhat an abstract notion that can vary in interpretation, at its heart, justice entails recognizing individuals as autonomous thinking beings, even though there may be disagreements regarding its essence, foundation, and rightful use. Aristotle's theory of justice primarily stems from Book 5 of his Nicomachean Ethics. This book delves into the essence of a fulfilling human life and more specifically explores the virtues that are crucial to achieving it. He also presents justice as a vital virtue tied to the makeup and operation of constitutions and political arrangements in his main work on political philosophy, which is Politics, which was written around 4th century BC. Aristotle begins by making a clear distinction between two types of justice. One is complete or general justice, and second is partial or particular justice. In simple terms, he states that we label things as just when they contribute to and safeguard happiness, either for the entire society or for its individual components. This notion of justice in its comprehensive form is described as a virtue that pertains to how individuals interact with others. Aristotle even quotes Theognis, a poet, to emphasize the idea that injustice is every virtue summed up. So, complete justice essentially embodies the character trait that people exhibit in their interactions with others, specifically when these interactions contribute to a good life and lead to happiness for the entire community. Contrastingly, partial justice deals with how individuals should fairly receive benefits and shoulder burdens. Aristotle points out that these benefits include things like honor, material wealth, and security. While he doesn't place as much emphasis on burdens, it's evident that partial justice also involves determining how individuals should equitably bear hardships and harms. In simpler terms, injustice in the context of partial justice arises when someone gets an unfair share of benefits or burdens. When delving into Aristotle's thoughts on justice, it's common to follow the sequence he lays out. He begins by separating complete and partial justice, with a particular emphasis on the latter. Within partial justice, Aristotle further distinguishes between distributive justice and corrective justice. He later explores various facets such as the connection between justice and reciprocity, the political dimension of justice, and other related topics. Although it is compelling to follow the sequence which Aristotle lays down, but to understand his conception of justice, it is crucial to explain the relationship he draws between justice and reciprocity. It serves as the steadfast anchor to which his notions of partial justice are firmly attached. So, before delving into distributive and corrective justice, let's briefly grasp Aristotle's fundamental understanding of reciprocity. Aristotle starts by pointing out that some people believe that reciprocity is the same as justice, as the Pythagoreans did when they defined justice simply as reciprocity. However, Aristotle goes on to argue that this view is not entirely accurate because there are situations where reciprocity and justice do not mean the same thing. For example, if a student were to argue with the teacher in a classroom, it wouldn't be just for the teacher to respond by arguing back with the same intensity. Likewise, if someone in a higher position at work scolds a colleague for a mistake, it wouldn't be just for the colleague to respond with equal harshness. Aristotle's main idea is that in situations where there is a clear hierarchy or unequal power dynamic between individuals, justice does not align with the concept of reciprocity. Reciprocity typically involves giving back benefits or harms of the same value as what one had received. But this principle doesn't apply in cases of hierarchy or inequality. This does not mean that Aristotle excludes any idea of reciprocity, but only expresses his disagreement with any unqualified idea of reciprocity. Aristotle asserts two important points to give his account of reciprocity. Firstly, Aristotle links justice to reciprocity in accordance with a proportion, rather than the Pythagorean idea of equal exchange. In simple terms, he suggests that an exchange is just when what's exchanged aligns with the merits, the worth, or the contributions of the parties involved. If two parties are completely equal and trade with each other, justice means their exchanged benefits are of equal value, which create a balanced reciprocity. However, when the parties differ in merit relevant to their transaction, justice is achieved when the exchanged benefits reflect these differences in proportion. This creates an imbalanced reciprocity, with the extent of imbalance determined by comparing their respective merits. Essentially, justice hinges on reciprocity, but not necessarily of the arithmetic or balanced kind, as Aristotle puts it. Secondly, Aristotle's main focus is on communities where people come together for the purpose of trading and mutual exchange. According to him, a true political community is one where its members engage in these exchanges, allowing them to thrive collectively and be self-sufficient. This community consists of free-born men who, at the very least, share a relative equality, meaning none has a natural right to command others. People do not fall within this category of relative equals, such as women, children, and slaves are not included in Aristotle's concept of justice based on proportional reciprocity. Having understood the relationship between justice and reciprocity, let us now turn our attention to Aristotle's political conception of justice. Aristotle separates justice, which deals with fairness in what individuals receive, into two types: 1. Distributive, 2. Corrective. These types stem from two different ways of looking at reciprocity. Let us first explore the idea of distributive justice. Aristotle starts discussing distributive justice by mentioning that it comes into play when things like honor or property are shared among community members. In these situations, individuals can get shares that are either the same as everyone or different. Aristotle clarifies distributive justice with a straightforward example. He notes that justice in this context involves four elements: two individuals and two portions of something being distributed. Distributive justice occurs when the relationship between these portions is in proportion to the relationship between the individuals involved. In other words, it is fair when what each person receives corresponds to their relative importance or merit in the situation. In distributive justice, therefore, when two people are on an equal footing, they should receive equal shares. However, if there is an inequality between them, their fair shares should reflect that inequality proportionally. This idea is represented by a famous quote from Book 5 of Politics, which is treating equals equally and unequals equally. Aristotle provides a very general explanation of how to decide whether people should be considered equal or unequal. He argues that although people agree that desert or merit should be a basic criterion for distribution, but people differ on what should be the basis on which merit or desert gets determined. For Democrats, it is free birth, and for oligarchs, same gets determined by wealth. Aristotle emphasizes that distributive justice applies to various types of shared associations, but he places a particular importance on political associations. These associations involve people coming together to share their lives, aim for self-sufficiency and a good life. To achieve these goals, they need diverse contributions, including the production of goods and the provision of services. However, since human well-being involves various activities like friendship, mutual trust, companionship, or fraternity in interpersonal relationships, economic contributions alone won't suffice. Political associations must also include non-economic contributions to reach their objectives. This means, therefore, when people argue about who deserves what in a community, it is really about deciding how to compare the importance of different contributions people make to the community's shared goals. Thus, distributive justice within a political community also involves the question of how to compare relative contributions of individuals within that community. It is possible for some goods to be evaluated in monetary terms, as Aristotle accepts in the case of funds, but to do the same with goods which cannot be translated in monetary value remains an unsolved puzzle within the debates of distributive justice following Aristotle. Having discussed Aristotle's views on distributive justice, let us now turn our gaze to second important aspect of his political conception of justice, that is, corrective justice. Aristotle introduces the idea of corrective justice, which deals with two kinds of private dealings, voluntary and involuntary. It is important to note that when Aristotle talks about transactions, he does not just mean voluntary exchanges like buying or selling, but any interaction between people that involves giving or receiving benefits or harms. In all such interactions, principles of justice come into play. Voluntary transactions are ones where everyone involved willingly agrees. Aristotle provides examples related to money matters like buying and selling, lending money with or without interest, renting, providing security, and depositing funds in trust. Involuntary transactions, according to Aristotle, fall into two types. The first kind includes secret actions like theft, adultery, poisoning, assassination, aiding slaves to escape, and lying. The second kind involves the use of force, such as assault, imprisonment, murder, robbery, causing harm, spreading false information, and damaging someone's reputation. It should be noted that Aristotle's idea is to fix unfair transactions. Distributive justice deals with sharing honors, goods, or security fairly, while corrective justice involves a judge. Corrective justice steps in when transactions were originally unjust. Corrective justice in relation to voluntary transactions is about straightforward equality or balanced reciprocity, not comparing proportions. Unlike distributive justice, it does not weigh the relative significance of each person's input to the community. For example, if someone takes more than their share, like an unfair slice of a pizza, a judge rectifying this unfairness would take away the extra and give it to the person who got less, regardless of their roles or contributions. Aristotle's idea is that when there is a disagreement, like a fight over something, the worth of each person involved, based on what they have contributed, is already considered when they get their fair share of goods before any unfair actions. So it wouldn't be just to consider this again when settling the dispute. Corrective justice assumes that each person had a fair share before something unjust happened. The goal of a judge or a mediator is to restore the balance that was there before the unfairness. They do this by taking away any extra gain from the person who benefited unfairly and giving back what was lost to the one who was treated unfairly. Let us now see what Aristotle has to say about corrective justice pertaining to involuntary actions. Some scholars argue that he did not discuss punishment or retributive justice in his ideas about justice, which does seem odd. This misunderstanding might be due to imposing our modern crime versus torts view onto Aristotle's ancient society. Aristotle did consider retributive justice linked to the principle of an eye for an eye. He used the term reciprocity, meaning suffering in return for one's actions. When discussing justice as reciprocity, Aristotle hinted at the need for punishment, especially when someone harms a person, breaching the limits of his area of action. In his ideas about corrective justice, Aristotle talked about balancing actions and their consequences, suggesting the need to equalize the harm caused through a form of punishment. He believed that when a crime occurs, the right thing to do is to restore the balance that was disrupted. This idea was common during his era and is a key aspect of retributive justice. It is evident that Aristotle did not overlook this aspect in his thinking. When it comes to involuntary transactions, corrective justice treats the people involved equally, considering if one has caused harm and the other has suffered it. In cases where someone has harmed or killed another person, equalization is restored by harming the wrongdoer. Aristotle does not give a specific formula for how much harm should be inflicted as punishment. His main point is that those who harm others should, in turn, experience harm, or else the victims would feel like slaves. As a general guideline, he suggests that the punishment should match the harm caused, restoring the equilibrium. It is important to notice that the concept of arithmetical equality, as in this case, applies when we can confidently assume that the individuals involved are indeed equals and their situations are genuinely similar. In these cases, justice calls for not proportionate but completely equal treatment. In a sense of such cases, the principle of equity simplifies to pure reciprocity. Now, let us discuss Aristotle's concept of justice in a political community. Justice applies to any group of equals that engage in mutual exchange. However, Aristotle emphasizes that the primary focus of justice is within the political community. He is not just talking about basic justice, but specifically political justice, which involves free and proportionally, or in some cases arithmetically, equal citizens living together to meet their needs in a just and a balanced manner. Aristotle categorizes political justice into two types: one that is naturally just, and two that is just based on conventions. Aristotle's distinction is quite simple to understand. Justice by convention refers to issues that wouldn't matter if there was established rules or agreements. For instance, think about the choice of which side of the road to drive on, whether it is the right side or the left. The choice itself does not hold inherent significance, much like choosing to use a pen or a pencil for writing. However, once an agreement is made, like choosing the left side for driving, it becomes a convention. Violating this agreed choice, such as driving on the right side without agreement, becomes an act of injustice. Here, justice and injustice are shaped by adhering to or breaching these established conventions. On the flip side, what is inherently just refers to things that would still matter to us, even without the established rules. For instance, think about acts like assault or murder. These acts would concern us and be considered wrong even without specific laws to prohibit them. In a broader sense, actions that enhance human well-being, actions that create and sustain happiness within a society are inherently just. On the other hand, actions that diminish the well-being or happiness of the community are inherently unjust. What actions promote the well-being and happiness of a community can vary depending on the time and situation. So, what is naturally just or unjust can change accordingly. Furthermore, Aristotle highlights that each distinct political community has its unique characteristics. Actions that help sustain one type of community might not be suitable for another. Hence, what is seen as just in one community could be seen as unjust in another. However, at any given time or circumstance, there is a relatively clear understanding of actions that lead to human well-being. Aristotle suggests that in general, it's not hard to tell apart actions that are naturally unjust from those that are considered unfair due to social conventions, except perhaps in certain exceptional cases. The question then arises, does it mean Aristotle's conception of justice in a political community is not universal, or doesn't furnish us with a standard which can be used to evaluate the justice and injustice of a law, or is it that he makes the conception of justice within a political community akin to law of that community? In the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle gives us hints that support the latter idea. For instance, in Book 5, he talks about what just means. He says that just encompasses what is both lawful and fair, while unjust involves what is unlawful and unfair. Shortly after, he makes it clear that all laws can be seen as just in a way. He points out that laws are essentially the result of legislation, and we generally agree that each outcome of legislation can be considered just. So, Aristotle is suggesting that there is a connection between what is lawful and what is just. Yet, Aristotle's discussion in other parts makes it evident that the laws we have in practice might not always be perfect. Sometimes these laws can be flawed and even outrightly unjust. Aristotle is pointing out that there is a kind of justice beyond merely following the laws. a sense of what is right that is not solely tied to what the legal system says. For instance, only in the Book 5 of Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle emphasizes that laws, even when at their best, aren't flawless representations of justice. Truly grasping what is just and what is not goes beyond simply knowing the law. It requires wisdom as well. Laws are not automatically just. Their fairness comes from careful and thoughtful crafting. It is clear, therefore, that Aristotle did not think we could evaluate whether existing laws are just or unjust based on an unchanging and eternal natural law. He did not even entertain the notion of this kind of natural law for political and legal matters. However, he did believe in using the concept of reciprocity as a measure to judge the fairness of laws. According to Aristotle, the well-being of every city-state hinges on maintaining reciprocal relationships, making reciprocity a crucial standard to consider when assessing the justice or injustice of laws. Aristotle's theory of justice, deeply rooted in Greek political thought, has had a profound and enduring impact on the understanding of justice within moral and political philosophies. Justice, according to Aristotle, is a linchpin virtue that governs human interactions, essential for the stability and prosperity of societies. He divides justice into complete or general justice and partial or particular justice, elucidating their roles in fostering happiness at both societal as well as individual levels. A fundamental aspect of Aristotle's conception of justice is the relationship he establishes between justice and reciprocity. He acknowledges reciprocity as a key principle but refutes the simplistic notion that it equates to justice in all circumstances. Instead, Aristotle emphasizes reciprocity in accordance with a proportion, indicating that justice entails fair exchanges based on the merits, worth, or contributions of the parties involved. He also underscores the context of a political community where individuals, viewed as relative equals, engage in exchanges to thrive collectively and achieve self-sufficiency. Aristotle further delineates justice into distributive and corrective forms. Distributive justice concerns the fair allocation of honors, property, and other benefits, ensuring proportionality based on an individual's merit or contribution. Corrective justice, on the other hand, addresses both voluntary and involuntary transactions, aiming to restore balance and rectify unjust actions. In the realm of a political community, Aristotle differentiates between justice by convention and inherent justice. Justice by convention relates to adherence to established rules or agreements, shaping what are deemed just or unjust within that society. Inherent justice pertains to actions that inherently enhance or diminish the well-being and happiness of the community, transcending mere social conventions. Aristotle's approach to justice does not propose a universal and unchanging standard, but instead stresses a nuanced understanding based on the particulars of a given community. He stresses that the concept of justice is not solely derived from laws but requires a deeper wisdom to discern what is truly just beyond the legal frameworks. Reciprocity remains a vital criterion for evaluating the fairness of laws and ensuring the well-being and stability of the community. In conclusion, Aristotle's multifaceted theory of justice, intricately woven with the concepts of reciprocity and the dynamics of political communities, offers invaluable insights into the ethical and political foundations of a just society. His ideas continue to inform contemporary discussions on justice, enriching our understanding of this fundamental and complex concept. With this, we come to the end of today's lecture. Hope you've enjoyed watching it. Thank you.